Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Alhamdulillah. This is now episode 45 of the podcast, The Forward, myself with Mahdi Locke. And again, I'm joined by al-Hajj Abu Ja'far al-Hanbali. And today's topic is the book, A Word of Advice, by Imam Muwaffaq Qudama al-Maqdisi, which al-Hajj Abu Ja'far translated several years ago. He actually translated 10 years ago.
That's correct.
And the second edition came out, last year was it?
That's right. Came out last year.
So we're going to look at this, and then we're going to look at the topic of Tasawwuf in general. So, al-Hajj, if you could start off with this first point about what is Tasawwuf.
Okay, so this word Tasawwuf, literally, when you look at it in Arabic, if you look at it, means kasuf is wool. So Tasawwuf means to be woolly, to take on the quality of woolliness. However, Tasawwuf in its technical sense is referring to what is often translated in English as Sufism. All right. Now, the Prophet ﷺ in Hadith in Muslim referred to 4 aspects of Islam. He was asked about what is Islam, and he gave the outward forms, which were the 5 pillars. He was asked what is Iman, and he gave the 6 things. He asked what is ihsan, and he said it is to worship Allah as if you see him, and if you do not, then know that he sees you.
This is the Jibril Hadith,
Yes.
which is the second Hadith.
It's the second Jibril Hadith. The first one is the Salah.
Yeah.
This is the second one.
Yeah, and this one is the second Hadith in the Arba'in Nawawiyah, Imam Nawawi's 40 collection.
So, this Hadith in the 4th part, the 4th aspect of the Hadith, he's asked about signs of the end of time. After all that's summed up, he then says, this is Jibril who came to you to teach you your religion. So ihsan is known as one of the aspects of your religion. It came to be known as Tasawwuf because Imam al-Shatibi mentioned something very significant about this. He says, Imam al-Shatibi rahimahullah, he says, quote, "We only single out this place to mention the matter, although all other sources were sufficient, due to many grossly ignorant people who have firm conviction that the Sufis have made innovation easy, and that they invented acts of worship and declared things compulsory that are not found in the revealed law. Firstly, the Sufis have built their way upon following the Sunnah and avoiding what opposes it. al-Hafiz Abul Qasim al-Qushayri, rahimahullah, is the one who the Sufis take from as a pillar of their path. He said that the name Tasawwuf was only taken to single themselves out from the people of innovation. He then mentioned that the Muslims after the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not name the best and most virtuous of their time with a name other than the companions, when there was no one above them. Those who came after the companions were called the followers, tabi'een. They saw this as the best of titles. Then it was said that whoever was after that, he was a tabi'. People differed and various matters became manifest thereafter. After this time, whoever had great strength, love, and dedication to the religion, these people were called zuhad or ubad. Al-Qushayri also mentioned, then the innovation appeared and it was claimed by every group that they had among them zuhad and ubad. Based upon this, the Muslim Orthodox singled themselves out in the sight of Allah as the preservers of their hearts from unmindfulness and took the name Tasawwuf. Close quote. So this is taken from al-I'tisam, volume 1, pages 69 to 78. So here he makes this distinction of where this is coming from and why.
Okay, so this is the word. So the word Tasawwuf, it exists in the first 3 generations.
It exists in the first 3 generations, but was not popularly known of a group of people until around the 4th age in al-Basra. Now, Taqi ibn Taymiyyah makes reference to this in his Majmu' Fatawa. He says, quote, "So it is known that this word Tasawwuf came to be from al-Basra, and it refers to whoever is traveling the path of worship and zuhud. There are people who work hard and have mastery in it, just as in al-Kufa are those who worked hard and had their mastery in fiqh. Due to what has occurred occurred to many people of this science in their ijtihad and the disputes with some people regarding the path, a group has repudiated the Tasawwuf and the Sufis, saying that they are innovators who have gone away from the Sunnah. Some people from amongst the Imams, scholars of fiqh and speculative theology, follow their detractors in their position. The right and proper conduct is to hold that Sufis are people of ijtihad in the obedience of Allah, just as others besides them commit themselves to ijtihad in the obedience of Allah. And this is taken from Majmu'ah Fatawa, and it is volume 11, pages 495 to 496 on the topic.
Okay, mashallah. Because the one example I can think of from the first generations, that would be Imam Shafi'i, because there's a poem in his diwan, Faqih wa Sufi fakun laysa wahida, and the Faqih and the Sufi don't be just one.
Right.
That was a short, brief description. So now that that has been established, we should focus on the author of the text. So who is Imam Muwaffaq ibn Qudama?
Okay, so Muwaffaq ibn Qudama, Muwaffaq is his laqab. His kunya is Abu Muhammad. His name is Abdullah. And he comes from a family of Palestinian jurists and theologians. And he was born in the city of Jama'il. Well, it's not really a city, it's more of a village. Jama'il, which is a village around Nablus, with their background coming from Jerusalem. This was in the year 541 Hijri, in the month of Sha'ban. He spent his early life learning from his father, who was the khatib and chief theologian at the masjids around the area, and also when the family was forced to move to Damascus because of the Crusader invasion that happened years before.
And that's why they actually weren't in Jerusalem at the time, because
That's
the Crusaders were occupying Jerusalem.
That's correct. So they were out of that area. Imam Muwaffaq ibn Qudama and his elder brothers and younger brothers, they'd never seen Jerusalem intact. They'd only known of Jerusalem under Christian dominion.
Okay, so what is his date of birth in the Gregorian calendar?
So you're probably looking at, I don't know month and day, but for year you're probably looking at 1146.
Okay, so 1146. So to put that in perspective, I believe in the Gregorian calendar, I think 1187 is the Battle of Hattin.
That's right.
That's correct, and that is when Imam Salah al-Ayyubi takes back Jerusalem, and Imam Muwaffaq ibn Qudama was a general in that army.
That's correct. There were three. There was Abu Umar, there was Muwaffaq ibn Qudama, and then there was also as an assistant, Imaduddin, which was another one of the brothers.
Okay, and that's something you've mentioned to me before. And one of his most famous fiqh texts, al-Udda, was written during this time.
Yes, al-Umda.
Al-Umda.
So it's called al-Umda fil fiqh. Was written as they were preparing for the retaking of Bayt al-Maqdis, which is Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, back from the Crusaders. It was written during this time, and the commentary notes came into play from his cousin Baha'uddin al-Maqdisi, who died 624 around the same time.
Okay, and his lineage? What is the lineage of Imam Muwaffaq ibn Qudama?
His lineage is, they're based in these Palestinian territories, Jerusalem. But when you trace the entire lineage back, they are of the tribe of Quraysh from the Adawi clan, and they're direct descendants of Umar ibn al-Khattab through Salim.
Okay, and we're going to come later in a bit. We're going to talk about Imam Abdul Rahman al-Jawzi, who's a classmate of his, and he is a descendant of
Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu.
Okay, Allah. So Imam Muwaffaq ibn Qudama, so he spends time studying in Damascus and in Baghdad, and then in Baghdad, that is where he studies with Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani.
Yes, in Baghdad, he heads there and he stays there for 4 years. He'd gone back and forth 3 times. Now, while he was in Baghdad, he's present and he's preparing his first major text, which is al-Mughni. And al-Mughni is 10 volumes. It's a commentary, a very large commentary on the Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi by Imam al-Khiraqi. So he's preparing this text over a 4-year period. And it is while he's in Baghdad that he meets Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah, who dies in the year 561 Hijri at 91 years of age. So he meets the Imam there and begins to study with him. Now, Abu Umar al-Maqdisi, his brother, had been there for longer. He'd been going back and forth there. But Imam Muwaffaq ibn Qudama, he comes in the middle portion of his brother's studies while there, and is sort of brought into the presence of this grand Imam and begins to take knowledge from him. He ultimately, before the Imam's death, he and his brothers, as well as a few classmates, rehearse all of the Imam's knowledge over with him over a 40 to 45 day period before he dies.
Right. And one of those classmates was Imam Abdul Rahman al-Jawzi.
Yes. Now, Abdul Rahman ibn al-Jawzi is a direct descendant of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And when you look at Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah, his achievements and his scholarly accomplishments were such that he encompassed all the major areas. But each student that took from him that he designated as his successor took away a certain aspect. So Abdul Rahman ibn al-Jawzi, his aspect that he took away, and he stayed in Baghdad, was his knowledge of hadith, classification, tafsir, and other areas. Muwaffaq ibn Qudama and his cousin, Abdul Ghani ibn Abdul Wahid al-Maqdisi, they're looking at the fiqh and theology. And they head back down to the south to Damascus. Then you have Abu Umar al-Maqdisi, who's looking at the Zuhud, and he's sent back down through Damascus. Abdul Ghani ibn Abdul Wahid al-Maqdisi ultimately winds up in Egypt. Right. So all of these different successors of his are taking on, known as khulafa, they're taking on different aspects of the sheikh. Together they equal him. But individually they're taking on different aspects, and he's sort of sending them out to different areas.
Okay. And just on that note, this tafsir, if you just give us a note about the tafsir of Imam Abdul Rahman al-Jawzi, how long is this?
All right, Zad al-Masir fi ilm al-Tafsir, in most printed copies, is around 4 volumes. Now, there's one you can get from a group that's called Dar ibn Hazm Publishers. And that is one huge volume, but the text is very small. But if you compare it to the manuscripts, there's very little variation. It's inconsequential, but it's huge.
Okay. And I should know that you've taught this text.
Yes, it took us, to get through the tafsir of Imam al-Jawzi, it took us 5 years and 4 months to teach from beginning to end, from the Muqaddimah, the opening, introductory remarks, all the way to the end. It took 5 years and 4 months.
How many sessions was that?
I'm not sure. I didn't count the sessions, but I can say that Surah Al-Baqarah was about a year. We spent just a year working on Surah Al-Baqarah and going through the ayat and the tafsir and the commentary, and just the flesh that came out of that. Because, again, no one in English had thought about doing something like this before. There'd been discussions, and people had looked at tafsir on, say, individual surahs. People had looked at tafsir on maybe tafsir Juz'amma, but no one had ever actually sat down and said, what we're going to do is we're going to take a reliable tafsir and we're just going to go through it, and we will not stop until we complete it. And we're going to record it.
Yeah.
And I hadn't... Now, have there been some people that have done it where it's not recorded? Possibly, but that's something that I don't know. But as far as recorded details, I don't know of anyone to have ever recorded an entire tafsir session from beginning to end, have posted it, and to have completed it.
Yeah, and that's now available on the Reasons for Faith channel, and we'll post the link below. Now, one question I want to ask as well at this point is just part of the methodology, the method of purification, according to Imam Abdul Qadir Jilani. How does that compare with, say, Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali?
The purification, the methods in terms of going through the process of suluk, and suluk will break down into how you treat others and how you treat yourself, and then the different maqamat of the self, the different levels of dealing with the self, watching the self, reckoning the self, rebuking the self, all these other things. The differences will focus primarily on the fact that Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahimahullah has stated that someone can progress through the levels faster if they do so individually, although it may cause great internal and personal hardship to themselves, but they can progress faster if they do so alone. Now, Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, coming back from the tribulations that he suffered has often a situation where there's the sheikh and the student relationship with regards to ihsan. So their methods will be slightly different, but they're taking you to the same goal. But the more arduous and severe method will be that of Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani.
Because I think you mentioned before that Imam Jilani, like his method, all his hair was wiped at the age of 40, and his beard. And everything.
Yes. So the strenuousness of his worship in his private time was such that he leaves at 25 to sort of lead this existence where he's trying to reach the level of being completely realized as a human being. This is the level of Kamal, Iman and Kamalan, right? He's trying to reach this level. And in the process of this, all of his hair turns white. And so when he returns back at 40 years of age into the public view, his hair is completely white. Hair on his head and hair on his beard.
Okay. SubhanAllah. So, to return to the actual text itself of A Word of Advice, could you tell us, first of all, what the text actually is and what it contains, some of its contents, and the general methodology that it can
All right.
covers?
The text that the Imam prepared deals with, as we said, the topic of Tasawwuf or Ihsan or Zuhud or these other titles. It deals with these affairs. And what it does is it walks the believer through, first of all, the beginning. How is a Muslim supposed to perceive life? And so he gives this parable of people that disembark from a ship on an island, on an uncharted island. And they're told they have a certain amount of time to collect as many gems as they can. It's not permanent, to stay for that period of time, and they must exert themselves in as much effort as possible. So they break into these two groups. The first group are those who exert themselves to their utmost. They're not building houses, they're not stopping for rest, they're just exerting themselves with little or no rest, and the only rest they take is when they're overwhelmed with rest, with just sleep. They can't go any further. Then the moment they reawake from being overwhelmed with sleep, they're back in the process of collecting gems again. They're exerting themselves again. Now within them is another group. This group, what they decided to do was they would set a time of the day where they would collect gems with the same stringency as the other group, but then they had a set time for sleep. They wouldn't wait for sleep to overwhelm them. They would have a set time. They would sleep within that time. Then when they finished that sleep and they were sure that they would rest, they were completely rested, they would start again. Now, the second group were those who believed that the time at that island was one of permanence. So they started not only digging for gems, but digging for chinaware, bone china, gold and silver, setting down seasonal cottages, building large structures, walling their encampments, really trying to live in a state of permanence and heedlessness. Then when the horn is blown, all these people are gathered together in front of the king, and the first group, which is split into its two groups, they've all collected gems and precious items, and the only thing they say they regret is that they would have liked to have had more time. The second group said that they collected no gems because they were too busy building seasonal cottages and playing around and loafing off and doing these other things. So the Imam says this is the parable for this earthly life. And the horn being blown represents the day of resurrection. So he breaks down this parable so that immediately the reader understands your time is very little. The precious gems represent your life and good deeds, good character, and then you need to move on from there. So he moves into the process about how the early generations understood their lives, how they carried themselves, how they viewed the permanence of the hereafter and the ephemeral and less permanent nature of this life. Then the end chapters of the book, the last, say, 4 to 5 chapters, are dealing with, okay, these are the matters that someone who is involved in ihsan, who wants to get to the level of worshiping Allah as if he sees him, these are the things that he needs. So there's certain du'as that are mentioned in the ahadith, acts of worship, praying at night, praying in the day, reflecting on oneself, thinking about their behavior, what type of attitudes to avoid, what type of character flaws to look out for, personal reckoning, personal responsibility, all these other things that are washing the inside and outside of a person.
Okay, Jazakallah khairan. So in the whole catalog of of books on ihsan and tasawwuf and purification, what makes this book so significant?
It's significant because it's the briefest and it's the most illustrative. Other books, like if you get Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahimahullah, a lot of his books, he assumes that you have previous knowledge of the topic. And the data that he gives, you have to have prior background knowledge before you can consider a lot of things. Sometimes he'll quote the ahadith and doesn't give you sourcing for it because his understanding is the people that are reading this will know, or whoever will be reading it back to a student will know. He'll be telling you to do things and he won't necessarily mention the evidence because he assumes that you know. In this text, Imam Muwaffaq in Qudama rahimahullah doesn't assume that you know everything. So everything is sourced with a text. Everything is sourced with an evidence. Ayah hadith, ayah hadith, ayah hadith, practice of the first three generations. So this is like a primer text. So someone starting out with this can then transition to books that have further details and data and build on top of it.
And that, for example, would be, say, books by Imam Abdul Qadir Jilani. Is that the idea?
Yeah, those would be books by him or books by Abu Umar al-Maqdisi, his elder brother, or other books like that that sort of build on this same principle.
And these other books, what is their availability in English?
Imam Abdul Qadir Jilani rahimahullah, I would say most of his books are available in English. Abu Umar al-Maqdisi, I'm in the process of actually translating his biography and life story. That should be probably out in the next 4 to 5 months, inshallah. But I'd say on the topic of ihsan, you'll often see, other than Imam Abdul Qadir Jilani, a few others, you'll see sort of segments of books that are translated. So you'll see one volume of Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya just one volume. Then over here you'll see one text translated. But then there's all these extraneous notes that have nothing to do with the topic in hand. Then over here will be one book translated, but the English used to translate it will be so arcane that it's not capable of being used and utilized. Then there's a book over here, and it's filled with all these practices, but there's no text for any of them. So it's like, okay, how do I then separate wheat from chaff and make the decision on what I'm going to use and not going to use? Whereas a word of advice joins between the principles of referring to righteous practices that purify the person, but also, okay, they need textual information. So once you know that you're on stable ground, you can proceed forward.
Okay, and is there any other reason, besides what you've mentioned so far, are there any other reasons why the Imam wrote this book?
In the opening chapter of the book, he said, I've been asked by many colleagues to prepare this book, and I have decided to answer them after deliberation and asking Allah whether I should do so or not. So he was actually requested in his time to do this book, which brings us to the understanding that in his time there was a lot of corruption going on among the people of Tasawwuf, because you had the Batiniya who had slipped in among the ranks of some of the people of Tasawwuf. The Shia, the Ithna Ashari often claim, as well as the Sab'iyya or the Ismailis, they often claim that they have a Sufi tradition or a Zuhdi tradition. And so they were there. So there was a lot of confusion, corruption. And then there was also people taking advantage of other people at that time. So Hassani Sabah and his group, the Hashishiyin, they were around during that time. So he sought to dispel a lot of this confusion by preparing this text.
Okay. SubhanAllah. So, and then furthermore, are there any other reasons why you chose to translate this text?
Yes, I chose to translate this text for a number of reasons. First of all, as far as we know, this is Imam Muwaffaq Qudama rahimahullah. This is his last work. It's his final book. Secondly is, in looking at the English-speaking world, I saw that there were these defects. And I saw that there were a lot of things that were actually negative that were happening to common Muslims. And I thought, okay, is there something I can do as an individual regarding this? Is there something where I see a boat that's going off course? Can I maybe put a rudder in? Or can maybe I offer a compass or an astrolabe, just something to try to get some people that are veering off back on course, but without doing so in a way where I'm denigrating or belittling them. So I thought, well, this is a great book. So I thought I'll use this because this is a book, I mean, someone who's just become Muslim could read this book. Someone who's a lifelong Muslim could read this book. Someone who's not even Muslim, if they just wanted to understand, okay, what is the tradition that Muslims have? What's their understanding about personal holiness or personal righteousness? What's the method? What is the way? How do Muslims view this? Because for a Christian looking at this, they would be thinking of, say, St. Thomas Aquinas as their first example of a complete self-realized man. For Jewish people, they'd be thinking of, say, the Baal Shem Tov or Menachem Mendel Schneerson or maybe the Alter Rebbe. They'd be thinking of sort of people like this. Or maybe the Gaon of Vilna. They might be thinking of people like that. If they're Christians, as I said, they'd be thinking of, St. Thomas Aquinas, or they might be thinking of St. John of Damascus or other people like that. So they're thinking, okay, well, what would Islam have where there's sort of a process, because they're using monasticism, and everyone knows that Islam mitigates against monasticism. So like, okay, well, they don't have monasticism. They don't have this. So then what is a fail-safe method that they use to keep the faith from becoming dry, that keeps it focused, that keeps the believer focused, that keeps him alert, that keeps him in a state of worshipfulness with his Lord, where he always knows his Lord's watching him? What is that they have, and how can we access it so we can examine it for ourselves and know for sure, rather than trusting, say, hearsay or anything like that? What can we use? And so this book, I thought, okay, this is a nice contribution.
Okay. So what you just published now, or in the past year, this is the second edition.
Yes.
So the first edition was published.
First edition, I believe, was published, what was this, 2007?
I think so. And what's the reception been like?
The 2007, this was my first published book that I translated from Arabic into English. Initially, it only had the English text. And there was a huge response to this book. And it brought up all these discussions around tareeqah and sheikhs, and then bay'ah to sheikhs. And there's nothing in here listed about bay'ah. There's nothing listed in here about this, that. So there were those contentious arguments. But then for the most part, people were just saying this is very refreshing because we were able to take a lot away. I got one comment from someone who was not a Muslim, who was in India, and said, as a comment that came through to me by email, I recommend this book to anyone wanting to understand the spiritual dimension of Islam. This is someone from India. Had no connection to Islam, no interest, it's nothing. But they just read that because they thought, oh, it's an interesting book. That was the first edition. Now the first edition I had the margins very small so that people could make notes along the side of the book. But most of the readers, when I read their feedback, said that they wanted the margins normal, and that they wanted to make the decision whether they wanted to make notes or not, or what have you. So I brought the margins back out to the normal dimensions, and then I inserted the Arabic into the text. Then the very long notes, because I don't know why, but for me, notes are half the book because they help to assist in knowing and understanding the book. So what I decided is any note that was longer than, say, 4 sentences becomes an appendix and goes in the back. So when I slipped all those big notes in the back, inserted the Arabic into the text, increased the margins to the normal font, everyone was happy.
Okay.
Changed the cover, everyone was happy. And so I put the first cover had a picture of a sunrise, or possibly a sunset, depending on how you viewed it. People were like, I don't understand how that's significant. So then on the second edition, I had Imam Muwaffaq Qudama's childhood house on the cover that he grew up in, and also the blue sky that was in the background. And the response that people was really positive, because they're like, oh, what's that? And so that was Imam Muwaffaq Qudama, his childhood home, and people were like, great, it's the author. And that draws them to him. It sets it in stone. Fantastic.
So I'm guessing you're saying that the reception's been good.
Yeah, the reception for the second edition, I think, was far better than the first, even though the reception for both was great. But it was just the first edition, the drawback that people had was margins are too small. Margins are too small, yeah. And the notes are too big. Other than that, they're great. They weren't saying the notes should be removed. They're just saying they're huge, and sometimes I'll turn and the text isn't there and it's just this big note. So it's okay, I'm gonna shift the notes to the back, other than a few biographical notices, shift them to the back, change everything up, and I haven't had any other criticisms.
Okay, excellent. Alhamdulillah. So based on everything that we've covered up till now, could we take it just to move on to another question here and say, so what does, based on what Imam Muwaffaq and Qudama has laid down here, what does Tasawwuf actually look like then, and what is the difference between an individual traveling the path and then someone being part of a group?
Okay, so an individual traveling upon the way of Tasawwuf will be looking at the three main methods, right? Muraqabah, which is watching of himself, examining his behavior. Muhasabah, reckoning himself, and looking at the end of his day. What were his sins like? What was his behavior like? How do I rectify this? How can I be better for the next day? And then number 3, tawbah, from any mistakes and any other things. So those will be the 3 sort of core principles of an individual. So he's going through these states. Now, people who are doing this individually in this manner will find very spectacular and unusual things happening to them that have been listed in history. So sometimes they'll have breaking out in hot sweats on cold days. They'll be crying in the prayer because they're remembering, the mistakes. They're thinking of the ayat that they've done, but they remember the mistakes that they made. Sometimes they'll be in situations where they will have moments come upon them where they can't explain what's happening. They will have events occurring in their lives and things such as this, miraculous incidents. They might have sudden weight loss, whether they're losing all this weight. And what that is all the dirt and all these other things gets purified from them. It gets ran off, just like impurities get sweated out, right? Just like, you'll see that some people hold that the water that's made from wudu, because it's washing away sins, is najis, that water, right? Some scholars hold that position, right? Well, the same thing when sins, the understanding the scholars of Ihsan have is that sins, when they're taken on, can sometimes become physical. So people, when they have physical sins in the form of adultery or other things like that, those sins have colors, they have weight, they have other things, and they not only mentally impact someone, but they physically impact them. So when someone begins to fight against those things, that starts to burn away and go away. When someone's in a group with a sheikh or a jama'ah of people, the process is slower and not as drastic. So when someone's by himself, the wife or family may become concerned because all of a sudden he's lost all this weight, or all of a sudden, his face looks sunken and all these other things. He's eating normally, he's being nourished, his food is nutrient dense. But because he's going through this process, the body's being purified because his mindset's changing, his attitude's changing. And the ruh, the soul, the body, and the actual aql are trying to get into alignment in tandem with one another. And in the process of doing that, things are being turned off, turned on, things are being pushed out and put back on. Whereas in a group, the process is slower. The sheikh will, the sheikh in person, and again, the sheikh in this case, who will be watching them, will understand the revealed law and will be a scholar in the revealed law himself. So he won't be a layman. He will have gone through the same processes that a layman has gone through, but he'll understand this through the revealed law, and he'll also have life experience. So when he comes to him, he'll be able to say, listen, this might happen to you. That might happen to you. You might encounter this, you might encounter that. And so because he sees this, he'll also get to see people who are more advanced than him, where they are, and he'll get to see people who are lower than him. And then he'll get to see people who are at the same level as him. And so he'll see the sheikh surrounded by all these brothers and sisters who are sick to one degree or another. And then there'll be these well people as well, these well people that are coming out of it. So the difference between the individual and the group will be quite drastic. One will be monitored and one is unmonitored.
So if I could just throw in one question here. I believe I read this one in the Fatwa of Imam Muhammad al-Bulti, because sometimes people who prefer the group method, they have this quote, they say, Man laysa lahu shaykh fa shaykhuhu shaytan. And Imam Muwaffaq said this isn't even a hadith, this is just a statement.
Yeah.
And it should mean that even it doesn't mean like that they have a shaykh or tareeqah, but is, you should have someone you can look up to.
Right.
It doesn't have to formally be a sheikh. Is that?
Yeah, as to be, a source. Now, if someone said that regarding about the revealed law in particular, that would be correct. But if we're talking about ihsan, we can bring examples where that's not the case. We can bring examples in the first 3 generations where people did not have sheikhs or what have you, yet they had high level. There's an evidence that's in Riyadh al-Salihin where Abu Bakr and another companion are speaking and they say, shall we not go visit Ayman and benefit? And they gather together because Ayman was seen as a source of great knowledge and ihsan and wisdom. And they used to go and visit her and take knowledge and take wisdom and benefit.
Okay.
So when you see that, you realize that, okay, this is an example of Ayman not necessarily having, being from among the scholarly companions, but nonetheless having some type of repository of knowledge, some deep level of knowledge that the companions were also deriving and taking from.
Okay. So based on that, then we've discussed about Tasawwuf, and we go back to Imam Muwaffaq in particular, and then his teacher Imam al-Jilani. What then is the Qadiri tareeqah?
Okay, so to understand the Qadiri tareeqah, we have to go into tareeqahs. Originally, what happened is in the time of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, rahimahullah, he opened up a zawiya. And the zawiya literally means like corner, but zawiya, he opened this up and it was connected to the side of the masjid. And what that was for people who were estranged from the masjid and from society. So he would go out and pick up some people who were Muslims who were laying in the gutter drunk in their own vomit, women who were fleeing violence in the home, men who had no place in society, were unemployed, didn't know anything or what to do. And he would bring them into this zawiya and he would feed them. And he would also give them tasks to do and other things to then occupy their time. And the feeding day for everyone was Thursday. So he'd gather together, and this continues even 1,000 years later. This is still going on in the same neighborhood, same masjid that he taught him. So he would feed people and do all these other things. And this method of his produced students and people of high caliber, because this acted as like sort of a social net where he himself saw these things happening, that the Khalifa was coming up short in his obligations and he was tyrannical anyway. Shaykh al-Qadir Jilani decided that what I will do is I will take this on. I will take care of this myself. And he began to take these people on. And so this was the birth of what we know as Qadiriyah, the Qadiri tariqah, which is of sort of a social group of people bringing people together to strengthen them, people, parts of society that were either forgotten or neglected, to then bring them together, to nourish them both physically and spiritually, and to care for them. Now, after his time, you had other jama'at that saw the utility in this and did the same thing, such as Mu'inuddin Shishti, who was coming from Shashtan, Afghanistan, but he settled in Ajmer, India. He was another such one. You had Imam Suhrawardi, who was coming from Sham, and he taught people and did the same thing. Then you had Muhammad Shah Bahauddin Shah Naqshband, who is coming from where today's Turkey is, and he did the same thing. So you had these jama'at, the Naqshbandi jama'ah, which became tariqah, the Suhrawardi, which became tariqah, the Qadiris, which were the very first, and then you had the Shishtis or the Shishtis, who became one as well. And then from that you had sheikhs within these jama'at, which would help followers and would also do additional things besides that. And then the jama'ah came to be known as, it might be the such and such, and then the sheikh's name would be added to that. So now there's like this double barrel name, right? Now the issue that comes though with this is that some of the slaves of Allah don't want to acknowledge that sometimes innovations creep into these things, because as you got into later ages, people who were not scholars of the revealed law entered into these tariqas. And so now you had people saying, well, this is my sheikh in fiqh, but he's my sheikh in tasawwuf. And he's a layman. Or this is my sheikh in creed, and this is my sheikh here. So people say, okay, I'm only study this. I don't study anything else. That's like, well, wait a minute. You're supposed to be, if you're going to be a sheikh over these people, you need to be complete to a certain degree to where you can assess their needs and address their needs. And that started to go away. Part of the reason for that is, I give the cassette example, but I think that's more difficult for people who don't come up from cassettes. So if I use this example, it might be easier. If you're making a scanned copy of something on your computer and you use the original book, that will produce an exact replica. However, if you take the copy that you produced from the original and you give that to someone else to scan, and then they scan that, and then they take that copy there comes a time where the resolution starts to dim. The quality starts to get lost. And if you carry on enough generations, the original thing that was scanned or copied or put across is no longer legible or recognizable to the first people or to those now. And this is what's happened to many of the tariqahs, in which it's unrecognizable what's happened to them. It's unrecognizable. Now, Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani rahimahullah, for his khulafa, the people that taught his way, his tariqah, we know who they are. We know their names.
One of them being Imam Muwaffaq Qudama.
Muwaffaq Qudama was one of them. Abu Umar al-Maqdisi was one of them. Abdul Ghani ibn Abdul Wahid al-Maqdisi was another one. Sari was another one. Ibn Idrus was another one. So these are people that were designated as khulafa. And anyone who does not fall under that category is not teaching Qadiriyah, as we would say. Now, this has then caused us today to see people claiming allegiance to the Imam, and we ask them for where they're getting their practices or their ideas. How can we trace you back? And we trace them back, and they don't reach those khulafa, in which case we have to dismiss them as liars. Because we don't care if you trace his lineage back and you say, well, we go back to Abdul Razak, his son. No, Abdul Razak al-Jilani was the son of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, but he wasn't one of his khulafa. He wasn't his successor in knowledge. So that's what we want to know. We don't care about that, because you can do that, because there will be some people who will be related to them. That's not the discussion. The discussion is the knowledge tree, not the neseb tree in terms of blood. We want to know, where did you get these practices from? How are you claiming these things? How did you come across this knowledge? If you kind of establish it, then you're dismissed.
Right. Okay. So then, in today's day and age, what form does the Qadi tariqah take nowadays?
Well, most of the claimants today to tariqah are liars. Or if they are not liars, the commonality among them are deceived. As far as the Qadiriyah of the tariqah today, you'll find most of the people today that will belong to it will belong to a sub-jama'ah, which is known as the khalwati. Because an imam came along and realizing that a lot of people had difficulties maintaining the stringency of it, he advised people that they should make adhkar in smaller amounts, but that the adhkar should reach its highest level on Jumu'ah, in which they should be in a state of khalwa for a part of the day, hence the term khalwati.
Isolation.
That's it. So this jama'ah within the Qadiriyah was easier for the commonality to carry out, to realize, and to also implement. And because it was easier to implement and realize, they were able to put it into practice much easier. So you'll find a lot of people that are Qadiri, they also have khalwati, like Imam Mustafa Shatti. He was Qadiri but also khalwati. You'll get a lot of the people that are Qadiris, it's because it's often encased inside of the madhab of Imam Ahmed, because this is where it's come from. So you'll find a lot of people that is their jama'ah. There's no, it's much more of a loosely organized system. Some of the other jama'at, they have bay'ahs and elaborate rituals, and the Qadiriyah, that's never been their custom.
It's like decentralized.
Yeah, it's decentralized. It's not this system. And you can't use wirds per se that, okay, the sheikh has demanded this wird. The sheikh can recommend, but he can't, an individual sheikh or person can't say, oh yeah, you must use this wird, because there's no one person that has the authority to do all of that. right? But if someone says, "Oh, look, there's a hadith that says afdalu dhikri la ilaha illallah," okay, well, that's an ayah, that's an evidence. That's a hadith, that's an evidence. But one person cannot say, "Oh, yeah, it's going to be like this," right? And part of that stops, from one person becoming the central figurehead. Now, some people would say, well, the downside to that is you don't have one organized feature or figure of it. And that's true. But on one side, it also keeps one person from becoming the figurehead, almost a pope-like figure that can't be questioned. Because that's also a problem. That's also an issue as well. And that's also dangerous as well, because we've seen what happens when people exact that type of authority.
And that's when abuse can creep in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why the last question I wanted to ask you was, how can a common believer better himself according to this path and at the same time protect himself from said abuse?
Okay. So a believer can better himself in this path by doing, I'd say, about 5 things. The first is to have a regular portion of Quran that he reads every day. Even if he says, well, I don't know the Arabic, I can't read it, or I don't have tajweed. Okay, that's fine. Do you have it reliably translated into a language that you speak? Yes? Okay. Then even if you read a page a day, look at how many pages there are, and then look at how many days there are in a year. And try to make sort of an intention to complete it every year. Secondly, is to have the right company. So to try to be around people who push you to be better than you are, people who advise you when you seek their advice and they advise you with goodness and honesty, and people who protect you from other people who might mean you harm. The third is that you should try to take from reliable sources and the authorities of this religion so that you're not thrown off and you find yourself on one end of the spectrum here and one end of the spectrum there. So many of the people that you'll find today that say that they're upon the path of the Tasawwuf will say they're on that path, but then they're confused about like fundamentals. They're confused about what Allah has said about his names and attributes. They're confused about how Allah has said the salah should be discharged. They're confused about these things. And those are things that should be resolved before, because if you look at the order that Tasawwuf is coming in, it's 3 in that four link chain. It's number 3. So the Islam and the Iman should be resolved before then. The number 4 thing I would say is that if they cannot find reliable brothers and or sisters to congregate around, then if they're in a situation where they have to be by themselves, then those individuals should be in a state of worship as much as possible. And their mujahidah, their supreme striving, is to try to do the prayers at the first of their time. As the Prophet ﷺ said in his hadith, the best of iman is salah ala waqtiha. Another hadith says li waqtiha. So at the first of its time. So if dhuhr appears at 109, to try to do dhuhr at 109. And if asr comes at 4:26, to try to do the first of its time. Right, to try to do these things. And then the 5th and final thing is to always make dua for protection and to make dua for right guidance. And if you uphold those things, then the other affairs will fall into place. And you'll also be protected from abuse.
So again, on this topic of abuse, so I should say, Jazakallah khair for that answer. That's really good. Inshallah, may Allah grant us tawfiq to implement that. But on the topic of abuse, what are some signs that someone will be looking for example, especially when it comes to tareeqah? What are the signs that are good, and what are the signs that are, not signs, but red flags that would tell someone, okay, this is not a genuine tareeqah, these are not people I will benefit from?
Okay. The one of the signs, the sign that you would look for is someone who's leading a tareeqah and he puts in you the desire to be a better human being, a better believer, and better to your neighbors. So your parents can see when you're at home, oh, subhanallah, we're yelling at him or we're telling him to do these things and he's still doing them, even in spite of us sometimes losing our temper with him. He's actually becoming a better son. He's becoming a better daughter. That's a good sign. A bad sign would be if he tells you to beware of your parents. That your lineage or connection to him is more important than that to your parents. So he starts to isolate himself from his family, from his parents. He cuts off his loved ones. He delivers ultimatums to his wife that it's either the sheikh or no one. These types of things, those are a red flag. A good sign is when he is teaching the slave of Allah Tasawwuf, but he's also teaching him other areas that he knows that he's deficient in. Oh, I saw the other day in Salah that, your feet weren't fully washed from the wudu. We're going to work on some fiqh with you. We're going to take you through a book. We're going to get that resolved. I notice you have this issue. I notice you have that issue. You frequently make statements like this. We need to resolve that. Right? So those are signs that you would see that he's taken an active approach. A red flag, the opposite of that situation would be if he demanded that in order to live in a certain city or to leave a city or to go somewhere, you always had to take his permission. If he demanded that you gave him honorifics or that your wife or certain women had to be alone with him at certain times for him to carry out things that he deemed were obligatory and that you were not allowed to divulge these topics. The next thing would be a good sign would be if he told you to get involved in your local community at school kitchens or at soup kitchens or schools or picking up litter or getting involved against trying to stop prostitution in your local neighborhood or things like this. Those are good signs. A bad sign in that area would be if he told you to collect money on his behalf, and that money might be zakat al-fitr money or sadaqat al-fitr money, and he used that money for his own self, and he never distributed zakat al-fitr. He never gave out the zakat al-fitr. You never saw him helping the indigent or the weak or the wretched or the dispossessed. And wretched in this sense doesn't mean those lost for eternity. Wretched in the sense of the barefoot, unclothed, the divorced, the former prisoners, people who have, they're in the lowest point of their life. You don't see him assisting these people, but he's collecting these vast amounts of money, and he has no oversight. There's no way to check him, right? The final point I'd say is when you have someone that advises you to find the right slave of Allah to be married with, to be the best to your children, to be the best Muslim you can be, to be good to your neighbors. These are good signs. When he says as a red flag to beware of such and such, I'm the focal point of your life. You should envision me when you make dhikr. You should consider me when you're making dhikr. I should be the dearest one to your heart, because if you follow me, I will avert punishment of the grave from you, or I will be your intercessor on the day of judgment. When people start making grandiose claims like these and other things, those should be red flags.
Yeah, because one of the things I mentioned in my book, The Big Step, about when you're sort of assessing a spiritual organization, I think the first thing I said was, aside from all the things you mentioned here, that's not in my book, but mashallah, that's really beneficial. But the other thing is also just, you can look at the followers.
Yeah.
And you can see, okay, these are people who have been with this sheikh or this organization for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. How they progress.
Yeah, there's been no progression.
How they changed. Like,
or they've gotten worse.
Yeah, they're spiritually worse. And then, I think the other thing was look at also is just aspects of the, what was it? There's their actual implementation of the revealed law.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can see things where they're doing things and it's not actually something that's the law has allowed.
Yes.
Shaking hands with women or things like this.
I mean, some part of the way that they'll prevent their followers from ever coming to conclusions like that or making those realizations is keeping them isolated. Our sheikh has not allowed us to go here.
Yeah.
Our sheikh has told us we may not go here, or our sheikh has warned us against this. And because the sheikh has now occupied this position where he's sort of this barrier between them and Allah, they feel they have to do what he says for their safety.
Because and that's part of why they put up these sort of dictums, like you can't travel without my permission. You can't go from one seat. You can't go from Nottingham to Leicester without my permission.
Yeah.
And it's sad because I know a lot of convert brothers who've had the situation where they got involved in a tareeqah like early on, And then they wanted to learn. They got an opportunity. Like someone actually offered them, said, "Listen, I can fund you. You can go to Syria. You can go to Morocco, and you can go to a school, and you can learn Arabic, and you can learn." And this sheikh sitting in England or wherever says, "No, don't go."
Yeah.
And then they stay.
And they obeyed. Yeah.
And they obeyed. And then you know, you meet that same brother 5 years later, 10 years later, like nothing has changed.
Yeah, he's still the exact same.
And so, I mean, one of the analogies I gave in my book was I said, you know, you have to think of, you know, a sheikh he's not the focal point of life. A sheikh is like, I mean, you know more about boxing than I do. I put the example of like a boxing trainer.
Yeah.
Now, his job is to tell you this is what you need to eat, this is how you train, this is how many hours a day you need to lift weights, how many hours a day you need to go jogging, whatever. But at the end of the day, at the end of all this training, he doesn't step in the ring. Yeah. You do. So you can't rely on him. You have to get in the ring with shaitan. You have to get in the ring with your nafs. Yeah. You have to fight these things.
Yeah.
So when the sheikh takes that sort of central role where everyone else just orbits around him, I mean, I've seen this myself on numerous occasions. These murids, they tend to sit back as if like, well, the sheikh's fighting for me.
Yeah, it's been resolved now. I don't have to worry about anything. Well, yeah, well, you should be aware of this because this is how sheikh's taking care of it.
Yeah.
Sheikh's taking care of it. Sheikh's taking care of it. Okay. Where is your personal responsibility? Sheikh's taking care of it. Yeah. So it's just, okay, well, what are you responsible for? Nothing, because the sheikh's taking care of it.
Yeah.
So they're hoping that when they're in their grave, the angel of death comes and they're asked the questions, they're hoping, okay, well, the sheikh will appear and he'll say, Yarja, go back. You know, stay away from him. He's with me. That's what and sometimes they've put that across and said, oh yeah, that's what I'll do. That's what I'll do for you. If you come to me and make intercession, it will be granted. And Imam Muwaffaq rahimahullah, he said, even if that's true, the one who says that should be killed.
Yeah.
Because it could put the Muslims to trial. Now, by no means are we saying that someone should go out and carry out this law.
Not that we vigilantism.
Yeah,
we're not advocating vigilantism.
We're not saying that. What we are saying is it shows the severity of how wrong this is, that the Imam actually recommended a judicial punishment for doing this, even if this person does indeed have this capability and quality.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely terrifying, but it's also this idea that I think people, again, something I'm talking about in my book is, you know, it's very, very important for a common believer. You have to get to a point where you're comfortable with an autonomous existence, where you're comfortable with the idea of learning and making decisions for yourself, and realizing that certain people are going to try to abuse you, certain people are trying to use you, and people are going to try to stunt you and delay you. Yeah. And take advantage of you, and you better watch your pockets, because a lot of your money is going to go, a lot of your time is going to go.
That's right.
And you need to take charge, because on the one hand there can be that appeal, you know, that's like I would call it a satanic appeal, where you're sort of feeling like, okay, I just have to give bayt to the sheikh and be nice to him and maybe buy him gifts and send him money, and that's it. I don't have to do anything.
The matter's resolved.
I'm resolved, and I can carry on with my sinning lifestyle. Yeah. Well, na'udhu billah, it's very, very scary stuff. So, alhamdulillah, I think we've covered everything we covered. Are there any other final points you'd like to add?
I mean, the most I'd say is, with any relationship, because ihsan is about worshiping Allah as if you see Him, which means it's going to be something that's going to be above your five senses. It won't be something that you'll see, taste, smell. It's going to be above the five senses. The key is to take your time, and with every deep and fulfilling relationship, it's always based on time. And with time, fondness grows, familiarity, trust, the faithfulness and fidelity. All these things grow. And all these things go into someone as part of their life. And the deeper they go, the better it gets. And the better it gets, the more they strive to be better than they were. And so if someone adheres to that principle, understands it, inshallah, everything else is clear.
Okay. And with Allah alone is every success. Inshallah, we will finish there, and we will convene again for another podcast, inshallah, very soon. Walhamdulillah bil alameen, wa salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.